The Colt .45 was never meant to look elegant. Blocky, heavy, and stamped with the year 1911, it seemed like a relic of another age by the time World War II erupted across the Pacific. While American Marines strapped the pistol to their belts, Japanese troops sneered. To them, it was an antique, too bulky, too slow, too unsophisticated for a modern battlefield that demanded rifles, bayonets, and speed. They saw the weapon as a useless ornament, an American weakness dressed up in steel. The Pacific jungle, however, was no parade ground. Rain-warped rifles, mud-swallowed boots, and bayonets that gleamed in training often snapped in real combat. Yet Japanese officers believed spirit and steel were enough. Their Arisaka rifles and long bayonets embodied a warrior creed that valued courage above machinery. To their eyes, the Colt looked like a gambler's pistol, not a soldier's weapon. They laughed openly at the sight of Marines oiling its slide, whispering that Americans clung to toys instead of real weapons. But laughter in war is fragile. A single shot can turn mockery into silence. While Japanese soldiers ridiculed the sidearm, American commanders remembered history. Earlier wars had already proven smaller calibers could fail against determined charges. The Colt had been born from that necessity. Heavy rounds, built not to wound but to stop. Each magazine carried only 7 bullets, but every one was a promise of finality. And so, hidden beneath its weight, was a truth the enemy could not yet see. The pistol was not an ornament. It was a safeguard. Backhand index pointing right before we continue. Make sure to subscribe to Requiem of Fear and drop a comment below. Your support helps us bring forgotten stories back to life. Among the thousands of Marines who carried the Colt .45 into the steaming jungles of the Pacific was a young man named Charles Evans. Barely 20 years old, fresh from the dust of basic training, Evans looked at the pistol with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. It was heavier than he expected, the recoil notorious, and the grip already scarred by countless hands that had held it before him. When he first strapped it to his belt, it felt less like a weapon and more like an anchor tugging at his side. To Evans, the rifle was the weapon of war. That was what training drilled into him. Long shots across ranges, precision aim, the crack of a Springfield or Garand echoing in rhythm with his heartbeat. The pistol? It was introduced as a secondary tool, an emergency fallback. In the barracks, older Marines joked about it, calling it the mule because of the kick. Some laughed nervously, while others muttered with quiet respect that you only needed one shot if it hit true. Evans wasn't sure what to believe. When whispers of Japanese mockery reached his camp, he felt that same uncertainty grow. Prisoners told stories of enemy soldiers laughing at the sight of Marines cleaning their sidearms. Translators carried sneering remarks. "Those pistols are for cowboys, not warriors." Evans wondered if they were right. He knew the pistol was old, clumsy, and limited to 7 rounds. Against a wave of charging bayonets, what difference could it possibly make? Still, every evening he found himself cleaning it. His hands moved with a ritual that steadied his nerves. Slide back, chamber checked, barrel wiped. The metallic click of the safety became almost comforting. Around him, the older men smoked and watched with the tired calm of experience. One leaned in and whispered, "They laugh now. Let them. You'll see soon enough." Evans nodded, but said nothing. He wasn't convinced. Yet there was something in the pistol's weight, something stubborn, something that refused to yield. It reminded Evans of himself, a young Marine untested, carrying doubts yet determined to stand. He didn't know then how soon that stubborn steel would prove its worth. The jungle would answer his questions. The island of Guadalcanal was a crucible. August 1942 brought sweltering heat, endless rain, and a Japanese enemy determined to sweep the Americans into the sea. For Charles Evans and the men around him, every day was a struggle against exhaustion, hunger, and fear. Rifles rusted overnight. Boots rotted from the damp soil, and the buzzing of mosquitoes seemed to compete with the thrum of distant artillery. Still, rumors carried into the Marine lines. Rumors that the Japanese mocked them, that they laughed at the Colt .45, dismissing it as a gambler's toy. Evans heard those words in his head as he crouched low in his foxhole. His rifle lay beside him, barrel steaming from hours of firing into the jungle shadows. The bolt stuck with sweat and grime, and his shoulder ached from the relentless recoil. Then, in the darkness, came the sound that every Marine feared, the guttural chant of a bonsai charge. Voices rose in unison, hundreds of men screaming as they hurled themselves forward with bayonets flashing under the moonlight. The earth seemed to tremble beneath their rush. All along the line, Marines fired desperately. Some rifles jammed, others ran empty. Evans' own rifle clicked uselessly, its chamber refusing to cycle. For a heartbeat, panic surged through him. Then his hand went instinctively to the weight at his side. The Colt. He drew it, thumb brushing the safety with a click that seemed louder than the storm around him. The pistol felt heavier than ever, but in that weight was certainty. He raised it, sighted on the blur of a charging figure, and fired. The blast was deafening in the close jungle, the muzzle flash blinding in the night. The .45 slug struck the attacker squarely, collapsing him mid-stride. Evans barely had time to breathe before another soldier rushed forward. Again he fired. Once, twice. The recoil jolted his wrist, but the result was final. The enemy crumpled before his momentum carried him forward. All around him, pistols barked. Marines who had doubted their sidearms now clung to them as lifelines. In foxholes and dugouts, the Colt became the last defense when rifles failed. Men discovered that at 5 yards, in mud and chaos, it was not range that mattered. It was stopping power. The Japanese charge faltered. Bodies fell short of the wire. The mocking laughter that had carried across the jungle was replaced by silence, broken only by the labored breaths of survivors. Evans sat trembling, pistol smoking in his hand, heart hammering in his chest. He realized, with both awe and dread, that he was alive because of it. Later, when the firing ceased and the jungle grew still again, Evans stared at the Colt resting on his knees. It was no ornament. It was no toy. It was the reason he still drew breath. He thought of the laughter, the sneers, the dismissive words of the enemy. They had underestimated what they did not understand. That night, the jungle carried a new echo. Not the derisive laughter of Japanese soldiers, but the blunt finality of a pistol shot. A sound that cut through chance, through charges, through illusions of invincibility. Evans would never again doubt the weapon at his side. The Battle of Guadalcanal had ended one kind of war, the war of mockery. What once drew laughter now commanded silence. But battles in the Pacific were relentless, and each new island tested men and weapons alike. The Colt .45, strapped to countless belts, traveled with the Marines into every landing that followed. At Tarawa in November 1943, Evans and his comrades found themselves wading through waist-deep water under withering machine gun fire. Many Marines drowned before even reaching the sand. Those who survived crawled into bunkers so cramped that rifles became clumsy burdens. Grenades rolled in first, smoke filled the air, and when the haze cleared, pistols took the lead. Evans remembered one corporal beside him, soaked to the bone, sliding his Colt free and firing into a dugout where shadows stirred. The deafening bark echoed in the confined space, and when silence returned, the corporal muttered, "The rifles are for the beach. The pistols are for the war." It wasn't bravado, only recognition. In spaces where survival shrank to seconds, the sidearm became the difference between life and death. By the summer of 1944, the pistol's reputation was no longer confined to foxhole whispers. On Saipan, Marines fought not just above ground but below, crawling into caves honeycombed into volcanic cliffs. Rifles were useless in tunnels. Bayonets clanged against rock walls. Evans carried his Colt into one such cavern, muzzle flashes painting the stone in violent bursts of orange. Each round fired was not simply defense. It was necessity, a heartbeat's margin between life and the unseen enemy just feet away. Japanese diaries captured during these campaigns revealed their shock. Officers who once dismissed the pistol as a gambler's toy now wrote of its devastating power. "It kills with one strike." One diary read, the script shaky but clear. What had been mocked became feared. Word spread quickly, carried in bitter whispers among enemy troops. The American sidearm was not to be underestimated. For Marines, the pistol also changed in meaning. Once viewed as a backup, it was now carried with quiet reverence. Some men cursed its recoil and weight, but they never doubted its authority. Evans found himself cleaning it more often than his rifle, not from affection but from necessity. Each time he reassembled it, he remembered the sharp recoil, the way an enemy body collapsed mid-stride. It was a grim reassurance. The Colt did not ask for respect. It demanded it. From the beaches of Tarawa to the caves of Saipan, the transformation was complete. The Colt .45 was no longer a relic or an afterthought. It was a weapon whose reputation had leapt across battle lines, carving itself into enemy diaries and Marine traditions alike. What began as laughter had become fear, and that fear would echo louder with every island yet to come. By late 1944, the Colt .45 was no longer mocked, but the change in reputation came at a cost. Every Marine who fired it knew the truth. This weapon carried not only stopping power, but also a burden. The pistol's voice was final. It didn't wound, it ended. For Charles Evans and countless others, that certainty was both reassuring and haunting. At Peleliu, Evans used his pistol 3 times in a single day. Each shot taken at distances so close he could see the whites of the enemy's eyes. The heat was unbearable, the coral ridges turning red under the sun, and the close combat unforgiving. That night, Evans sat cleaning the pistol with slow, deliberate care, his face hollow. The steel gleamed under his rag, but his eyes were fixed somewhere far away. He knew the pistol had kept him alive, but he also knew that every pull of its trigger left an imprint that could not be wiped away. The Marines joked in daylight to ease the tension. "She'll knock a man right out of his boots," one swore, shaking his hand from the recoil. Laughter followed, but it was nervous laughter. Humor used to cover unease. Each Marine understood that behind the jokes lay truth. The Colt was brutally effective, but it demanded a price. Its recoil bruised palms, its thunder left ears ringing, and its weight dragged constantly on a man's hip. Yet none dared dismiss it. Every evening, magazines were checked twice, then checked again. Fingers brushed its grip like a talisman, a cold reminder of survival's cost. Enemy accounts mirrored this unease. Captured Japanese diaries spoke of disbelief, astonishment that a sidearm could fell a charging soldier instantly. To a culture that revered the bayonet and the sword, the Colt represented something alien, mechanical certainty. There was no honor in the way it killed, only finality. For Marines, it was neither legend nor myth. It was simply practical. Evans came to view it less as a weapon of pride and more as an uncompromising partner. It didn't ask for loyalty, but it demanded readiness. It had no elegance, no grace, only blunt power. By then, Evans no longer doubted its purpose. He trusted it, respected it, and feared what it required of him all at once. The Colt had proven itself, but it had also reshaped the men who carried it. They learned that survival was never clean, and sometimes the weapon that saved you also etched scars you couldn't erase. The Pacific War was a relentless chain of crucibles. Each island carried its own horrors, its own brutal tests of endurance, and with each new battle the reputation of the Colt .45 grew louder. By late 1944, it was no longer seen as a backup weapon. It had become an extension of survival itself. When the Marines landed on Tarawa, the atoll seemed almost uninhabitable. Barely 2 miles long, a speck of coral bristling with Japanese fortifications. The landing was chaos. Men waded ashore through waist-deep surf while machine guns raked the water. Those who made it to the sand crawled into trenches so narrow that rifles became burdens. Grenades went in first, smoke and screams followed, and when the haze cleared, pistols barked in confined darkness. Evans remembered crawling forward alongside a corporal who pulled his Colt free and fired into a dugout where shadows shifted. The roar was deafening in the enclosed space. When silence returned, the corporal muttered, "The rifles are for the beach. The pistols are for the war." That single line summed up what every Marine was learning. By Saipan in June 1944, the pistol was no longer whispered about. It was doctrine. The Japanese had dug into volcanic hills honeycombed with caves. Rifles snagged on rock. Bayonets clanged uselessly. Marines crawled in pairs. One carried a flashlight, trembling in the dark, while the other aimed a pistol into unseen corners. Evans found himself deep inside one of these caverns, his Colt steady in his hand. Each muzzle flash illuminated walls painted with sulfur and sweat. Each shot brought a heartbeat of survival. The Japanese, who once mocked the weapon, now feared it. Captured diaries spoke of astonishment, even bitterness. "It kills with one strike," one officer scrawled before his death. Prisoners muttered about comrades felled instantly by small black pistols. The certainty behind their laughter was gone. Where once they scoffed, now they braced. At Peleliu, the toll deepened. Evans fired his pistol 3 times in one afternoon, each at point-blank range. He remembered the sound of the bodies falling, the echo that followed him into the night. Soldiers stopped joking about the recoil. They carried the pistol with quiet reverence, almost like a relic. Veterans handed it to replacements with a nod, letting the battlefield teach lessons words could not. By 1945, at Iwo Jima, the Colt had become legend. The black sands and volcanic tunnels magnified its reputation. Evans descended into caves with a pistol drawn, every step echoing against stone. The muzzle flashes carved violent murals on the walls. Men silhouetted in fire, dust swirling like smoke from a furnace. When he emerged into daylight, ears ringing, he carried the certainty that this weapon had been designed for the Pacific itself. And yet, its power came with limits. Its magazine carried only 7 rounds. Marines joked grimly, "The Colt will save you, but only 7 times." That joke carried weight. Each round was a promise, but also a warning. Waste it, and survival slipped away. Still, even those 7 chances meant everything. To Marines crouched in foxholes or crawling through caves, the pistol was a lifeline. To the Japanese, it was a nightmare, an underestimated weapon that turned into the most feared sidearm of the Pacific campaign. Evans carried his pistol across Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima. With each battle, it etched itself deeper into his memory. He no longer doubted it, but he also no longer viewed it as just steel. It was a verdict, a blunt answer to the illusions of war. The pistol demanded respect, not only from enemies, but from those who carried it. For Charles Evans, the war eventually ended, but the pistol never left him. Long after Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima had become names in history books, he still remembered the weight of that steel against his hip. The Colt was more than a sidearm. It was a memory, a shadow that followed him into peacetime. Years later, Evans kept the pistol tucked away in a drawer, scarred and worn from the Pacific campaign. Its bluing had faded, its grip smoothed by countless nights of sweat and fear. To anyone else, it was just an old firearm, but to Evans it was a survivor's companion. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the house grew quiet, he called his grandson into the study. From the drawer, he lifted the pistol and placed it gently into the boy's hands. The child's eyes widened. "It's heavy," he whispered. Evans only nodded. "It was meant to be," he said softly. He didn't describe the faces, the charges, or the caves. He didn't tell him how the pistol's bark had silenced mocking laughter in jungles half a world away. Instead, he said only one thing: "It kept me alive." For Evans, that was the truth distilled to its essence. The Colt was not a symbol of glory, but of survival. Every shot he fired had been a final line between life and death. And though the war had ended decades earlier, the echo of those shots never truly faded. His grandson looked at the weapon with awe, but Evans looked at it with something else: respect, sorrow, and an understanding that some designs endure because they demand to. The pistol had once been mocked. Now, in his hands, it was a relic of endurance, a silent testimony to what it meant to endure the impossible. The Colt .45 was more than a weapon. It was a verdict. In the jungles of the Pacific, it silenced laughter, shattered illusions, and drew a hard line between survival and silence. What began as an object of ridicule became a companion carried with reverence, feared by enemies and trusted by the men who lived to tell its story. For Charles Evans and thousands of Marines, the pistol was not about elegance or honor. It was about necessity. In mud-filled foxholes, in pitch-black caves, in the chaos of charges that turned men into shadows, the Colt's bark became a voice of finality. 7 rounds at a time, it demanded respect. Every bullet was absolute, leaving no room for doubt. Historians would later call it a timeless design, born of practicality rather than fashion. Veterans would remember it differently, not as a piece of machinery, but as a lifeline. To the Japanese who once mocked it, the pistol became a symbol of brute certainty. To the Americans who carried it, it was a reminder that survival often depended not on tradition or spirit, but on cold steel shaped for a single purpose. Evans understood this truth as he grew older. When asked about the war, he rarely spoke of generals or strategy. Instead, he murmured, "The pistol told the truth." And that truth was final, unchanging, unflinching, as enduring as the weapon itself. The Colt .45 was a relic that defied ridicule, a design forged by necessity and proven in fire. Its echo lived on, not only in museums or memoirs, but in the memories of those who carried it. Backhand index pointing right, thank you for watching. Subscribe to Requiem of Fear and share your thoughts in the comments, because some stories deserve to be remembered.